They're here. Excellent. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Happy Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month. Welcome to the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities Self-Advocate Discussion Series. I am Chris Hendricks, one small piece of the North Carolina Council and the Policy Education Coordinator. Thank you so much for being here. This discussion series is a place for North Carolina's self-advocates to gather and engage with each other to talk about things that affect our lives as people experiencing life with IDD and other disabilities. We want this time together to get to know each other and to get to know the council, where I and other individuals with IDD are leaders, colleagues, and we're valued for our input because we are who we are. People with disabilities should always be valued like that, and this discussion series will demonstrate why and how. Part of our mission at the North Carolina Council and the Self-Advocate Discussion Series is to inspire, empower, and connect self-advocates. As such, and as I do every month, I ask that our participants, if you are able, to turn on your cameras. We are here to be seen and heard, and we cannot make a collective impact without first having the courage to step into the light and express ourselves as individuals. Today's topic is all about that. It's all about collaborative effort. So we encourage you to share your thoughts and lived experiences around participation in group advocacy effort. Whether you help build the group or you choose to join an advocacy organization, be ready to tell your fellow advocates about your time with the group, what you did do, what you learned, and where do you think organized advocacy should go from here. As always, though, before we get into the program, let's keep the joy and relaxation on full blast with my colleague Philip Woodward's favorite part of our discussion series, the joke of the day tradition. First joke of the day. Why did the owl invite all his friends over? The answer? He didn't want to be owl by himself. Yes, we'll be here for an hour. Next joke. Why do trees have so many friends? Because they really know how to branch out. Get it? I'll give you a moment to laugh until your cheeks hurt. All right, we're getting some compliments on the jokes, so it means we're headed in the right direction. Perfect. So now let's take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan issued the initial public proclamation that the month of March should be recognized as Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month to increase public awareness of the needs and potential of Americans with developmental disabilities. I think that they should reverse those, the potential and the needs of Americans with developmental disabilities. I don't know if I have the power to do that, though. In the present, here and now, the governor has signed a proclamation stating that March 2024 in the state of North Carolina is recognized as Developmental Disability Awareness Month.
This is David, Chris. If you would, please let me know when to go to the next slide. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Thanks for that ask there, David. Whereas almost 200,000 people with intellectual and other developmental disabilities live across all 100 counties in North Carolina, and whereas it is the responsibility of all North Carolinians to recognize and acknowledge that it is not disability, but unjust societal barriers and attitudes that can keep individuals from realizing their full potential at school, work, home, and/or in their communities. And whereas all North Carolinians can contribute to improving the lives of people with developmental disabilities by becoming advocates and supporters of their increased independence, capacity, and leadership. And whereas expecting and enabling people with developmental disabilities to function independently and productively within our societal and economic structure can strengthen our state in all areas, including public and private sectors. And to fulfill the promises of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Executive Order Number 92, Employment First for North Carolinians with Disabilities, we reaffirm our commitment to full community participation for individuals with developmental disabilities by expanding opportunities and equal access to fully integrated competitive employment, education, housing, healthcare, and civic engagement. And whereas the state of North Carolina commends the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities, and other state agencies, businesses, organizations, and individuals working to improve the lives of people with developmental disabilities and their families through advocacy, capacity building, and systems change. Now, therefore, I, Roy Cooper, Governor of the state of North Carolina, do hereby proclaim March 2024 as Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month in North Carolina and commend its observance to all citizens. We thank you, Governor Cooper. You can access the proclamation on the NCCDD website. The link will also be sent out after this session with other resources, as I always do, and I thank you all for your reminders. Now let's get into the intro to the topic. If you could go to the next slide, please, David. Today, we're going to amplify our voices around the needs of our self-advocate communities. We're focusing on the collective power of organized advocacy. So all the names that you see here, all but one of these, are famous people with IDD, and all are renowned experts in organized advocacy. Today, we're going to learn from an advocate with over 20 years of experience speaking of and creating organized advocacy experiences. Once he shares his story, his why, and his current positions in the advocacy space, you'll have an opportunity to ask him some questions of your own. So now for a proper introduction to our presenter. I am so excited to introduce this gentleman. Next slide, please. Emmanuel Jenkins is the founder of a nonprofit organization called We Stand for Something, which supports individuals with disabilities and their families. Emmanuel is employed by the state of Delaware with the Delaware Developmental Disabilities Council as a community relations officer. Emmanuel serves on many boards and commissions locally and nationally. He is co-chair for the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, Developmental Disabilities Task Force. He's the vice chair of the state of Delaware's Rehabilitation Council, the vice chair of the Delaware Employment First Oversight Commission, and the vice chair of the Delaware Developmental Disabilities Services Advisory Committee. Emmanuel graduated from the Partners in Policymaking program in 2014. Emmanuel recently became a member of the Advisory Committee for the Self-Advocacy Resource and Technical Assistance. And as I've just learned, he is also a father to an 18-year-old son. Everyone, please give a warm self-advocacy welcome to Emmanuel Jenkins. Emmanuel, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our discussion.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Emmanuel, you are the busiest advocate I have ever met in my life. I don't think I've connected with another self-advocate who's on as many boards and as part of as many organizations as you have been and as you are. So I don't know how you have time to do everything, but before we get into that, the first question is, what got you into organized advocacy and why is it important to you?
First and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to connect with you guys today and to share my experiences. I always look forward to opportunities like this, and I like to start by saying thank you for the invite. To start off, one of the things that really got me into advocacy and really having a voice was partners in policy making. I took partners. I was sitting in partners about my first 2 months of partners. I literally said, "What am I doing here? I know what I'm doing. There's nothing they can teach me. I was born with a disability. I got this." There was a gentleman by the name of Al Cardalucci. A lot of people know who Al Cardalucci is. And Al came in and he talked about micro and acro and the disability space. And it was in that moment that I realized how much I did not know. And that was the start of something that I didn't know it was gonna turn out like this. But it turned my life completely around. Years before taking partners, there was a gentleman by the name of Steve Tall. I went to school with his son. And every time I saw Mr. Steve would say, "Emmanuel, you need to take partners in policymaking." Well, when I was younger, I wasn't worried about nothing but girls and money. That was it. That was like the story of my existence. And every time I would see Mr. Steve, I would go the opposite way. Years later, I had no idea that it would come back full circle, and someone literally convinced me to take partners, and I took partners, and now the rest is history. But that got me into it, and then thinking about the lives of people with disabilities. You said it earlier. Really being seen and being heard and being part of those discussions, and there's something that I always like to refer to. We're all used to the phrase, nothing about us without us. Well, I want to take it a step further, and I always tell people, if we're not invited to dinner, then we may be on the menu. So to ensure that we are not on the menu, I wanted to be involved and make sure that my voice was not just heard, that it was heard, but it was heard in the sense of we need to do something and we need to do it now.
So I heard a couple things in all of that stuff that you shared, which was a lot, and all of it was very important. But I heard, what I heard from you was a sense of urgent leadership. And more importantly, an urgent self-advocate leadership, where lived experience and professionalism both matter. Am I interpreting that correct? Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely, and if I could just add to that, I think a lot of times we look at, and I say we because this is a collective movement. I think sometimes we tend to look at people with disabilities as having lived experiences, but those lived experiences are professional skills. Being able to intertwine your personal experiences and put it to use in the employment world. You can't buy what we know. You can't buy it at Amazon. You can't buy it at Target. You can't buy it at Walmart. Lived experiences is not on that way. You can't make a payment plan for it. So people with lived experiences have an obligation and a responsibility to utilize those experiences to elevate the world of advocacy, and we should be at the table to have these discussions.
I'm gonna repeat one of the quotes that you shared earlier, and hopefully it'll inspire our audience as much as it has inspired us at the council. If we're not invited to dinner, we might be on the menu. That might be my quote of the year. Can I steal that? It's your
Absolutely.
quote.
Listen, I took that quote from somebody else and added to it. So it is yours to take it and tweak it and make it your own. And you know, one of the other things, if I can add really quickly, the
Sure.
pandemic really did something to me. I started to watch people with disabilities. I was actually on the allocation task force for the state of Delaware about who was going to be in line to get the vaccine first. And sitting on those discussions, listening to doctors who took an oath to first do no harm, talk about the less valuable people with disabilities needing it, not having the right to ventilators. It was in that moment that my resume began to add on all these committees and boards and organizations, and because I realized that my life and all my friends' life and all the people that I didn't know yet, generations after me, it was at that moment that I realized that our life was at stake, and no one would value how good our life was if we were not the ones speaking up. So the pandemic really pushed me forward, a kind of voice that cannot be ignored. And what I like to tell people, you can ignore my presence, but you can't ignore my existence. Even my tombstone will tell you that I was here. So people may try to ignore your presence, but they cannot ignore your existence.
Y'all, Emmanuel dropping some truth bombs up in here. Man, that is some powerful stuff. So now we'll get into more how you're able to utilize, how to channel that power. Can you tell us a little bit about We Stand for Something and how it uses organized advocacy to impact the IDD community?
Absolutely. So the idea of We Stand for Something actually came from the Partners in Policymaking graduation. There was a requirement that you had to have a final project. Some people made brochures, some people made legislation, some people invented things. And I went as far as I could go. I wanted to do something that even I couldn't see it to be possible. And that sounds kind of weird coming from me, but I wanted to do something that even I couldn't see how big it could be. So I decided to create a nonprofit, gave myself 2 years, because at that time, the Delaware Partners in Policymaking program was every 2 years for adults. So I gave myself a 2-year window to be able to come back as a speaker and to be a full functional nonprofit. So with the 2 years, it was fully functional and legal through the IRS with the status of a 501c3. But we focus on individuals with disabilities and their families, and the advocacy piece comes in because we really help individuals learn. Notice how I said learn. Cause advocate. We don't just advocate for you. We teach you how to do it. It's that old analogy of teach a man to, feed a man for a day, but you teach him how to fish or feed him for a lifetime. So we want to teach people how to feed themselves for a lifetime, and we do that through helping people learn those skills. But we also help people through the different processes of employment, education, systems change. You name it, we have our hand in it.
Mhm.
You know, oftentimes we do have a focus on people with IDD and DD disabilities. However, we really make sure that our change impacts everyone, because there's too many times we often refer to the disability community as the disability community. That automatically creates separation.
Yeah.
And we already have enough of that going on in our country. We all live under one world. We may have different perspectives of that world, but we all live under one world. So we teach people how to do all of that on their own.
What I'm hearing, what I'm hearing you say, Emmanuel, is that if you're strong enough to have your hands in everything, you have to be seen by everyone eventually. And it seems like you're well on your way to helping our community see that with all the things that you're involved in and all the people that you're connected to. And I heard so many wonderful nuggets here, so quotable, as the chat has been saying since you started talking. There are so many quotable nuggets. We got some amens from the chat. You know, clearly you're speaking to an audience that is glued to you at the moment, as am I. And I want to take some time. There's other questions that I wanted to dive into, but I also want to give our audience the opportunity to ask you questions. So let me go ahead and jump to this one here. There's so many things that you've shared. It would take up too much time for me to repeat all of them, but one of the things I want to mention and repeat, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're teaching as much as you're learning when you're a part of these organizations. And like, you learn so much as a teacher of advocacy, and then you get to take what you learn and teach more. It seems like a perpetual cycle of growth, which is so important for our community. And you also talked about the need to just step outside of your comfort zone and push yourself towards something bigger, something greater. We're all capable of doing that. And it's so important to see you showcasing that very, very real possibility. And so with that said, what do you think are the key takeaways for our audience when it comes to organized advocacy? What's the most important thing for them to hold on to if they want to get into organized advocacy, whether they want to start their own organization or join an organization? You know, maybe they're shy for one reason or another. They don't think organized advocacy is for them. What would you say to that group of people?
First and foremost, the first thing I would say is start. Yeah, it might not look like Emmanuel, it may not look like Chris, it may not look like your neighbor, but start. You don't have to I often tell people you don't have to be great to start. You have to start to be great.
Mhm.
So you have to get moving in order to learn different ways of advocating. What I would say to that shy person, the turtle shell person, because turtles, they like to put their head out and then pull it back in, put their head out, pull it back in. So that turtle shell person, I would say, advocacy is going to look different. You may not go and speak on Capitol Hill. You may not join boards and commissions. I urge you to join boards and commissions. However, that may not be your form of advocating. Your form of advocating may be starting a blog, starting a YouTube channel, writing a book, writing music about systems change, writing stories, whatever it may be. Oftentimes we talk about advocacy and we automatically go to boards and commissions and councils and joining all of these different things. And those things are absolutely wonderful. But everybody's not going to start there.
Mm.
So use whatever internal talent you have. Maybe it's simple as playing with Legos and being able to show accessibility through the power of Legos. That may seem extreme to some people, but when people start to see replicas of buildings and what they should look like when it comes to accessibility. So use whatever talents you may have, because we all got some. We all got
Amen.
there was no person born on this earth without a talent. The secret of life is finding what that talent is, and that's the universe saying, you're here. Now your job is to find whatever your mission is. So again, your mission may not be speaking on Capitol Hill. I have a desire to run for office, but that may not be everybody's. But my point is, in all those takeaways, is that you have to do something.
Something indeed. And it sounds like as long as you explore your talents, that advocacy can really come from anywhere and anything. And there's some really cool, inspiring suggestions in the chat. Jessica shares that she loves the suggestions for out-of-the-box advocacy. Pam McCaffrey talks about how her and her friends created 501c3, Rev Up North Carolina, Register, Educate, Vote. Voting is a powerful way to advocate. We'll get into that a little bit later on in the presentation. And Sharif actually has a question for you, and I just had it in front of me and it seems to have disappeared. I think it was, if I recall correctly, and Sharif can correct me if I'm wrong, but what are some of the, or Sharif, do you just want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Hey, Emmanuel. So I would like to ask, so in terms of your advocacy experience, what type of obstacles or resistance did you find in society and even within your personal realm, is actually even within the field, if you felt any resistance to the advocacy that you were doing, and what type of support did you find as well?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. That is a wonderful question, and I'll try to answer it as quick as I can because it is a multi-layered question there. But one of the things I would say for the purposes of this recording and presentation, let's talk about opposition for a moment. Some of the biggest opposition, and I'll publicly say it on the recording because I stand by and I sit in what I believe. Some of the biggest resistance comes from within our own community. There are a lot of organizations, there are a lot of individuals that say they believe in hiring people with disabilities. They believe in that people with disabilities should have a voice of advocating. But when it comes time to sign on that dotted line, to pay people for what they know, they go silent. So that's some of the biggest opposition, because we are good. We are really good to join boards and commissions, hold positions of leadership because they're free. But the conversation changes in the world of advocacy when we say, you want me to come speak? Here's my fee. When you say fee, all of a sudden things go quiet. So that is some of the biggest opposition. However, the other side of that is we must be like that tree in the dad joke. We must be like that tree and really learn how to branch off.
Yep.
Some of the biggest movements knew how to network. Let's talk about Judy Human for a moment. Rest her soul. But Judy Human even got the support of the Black Panthers when they held up the Chicago building, San Francisco building, when it came to education. We have got to get out of our way of saying, oh, this is my cheese, this is my project, this is my council, this is my organization. And if we learn how to network, I not only help you, I not only help me, I help the generations that's going to come after us and beyond. All because I was like that tree. And I said, I'm going to branch off as many times as I can branch off to make this thing work.
Yep.
And what's significant about a tree is that when the branch gets so long, sometimes they break. And then the leaves fall. So in the world of advocacy, you gotta have people that ride with you, walk with you, crawl with you, till you get to a certain point, and that branch starts to break because they can't hold on no more because you done got too big, and now your life is being elevated, and now they can't be a part of it anymore because now they feel like you done got too big a headache. When the fact of the matter is, you just realize that this thing is bigger than you, and only you can do it and bring people with you.
You know, I've just to
Hopefully
bounce.
I answered your question, but that's how I would look at it.
Yes, you did. Thank you. Thank you.
And I apologize for interrupting. One of these days I'll learn how to not talk too much, but once again, I'm inspired and fired up. A friend of mine has a quote that he shared with me back when I was trying to start a nonprofit years ago. He said, without any margin, there is no mission. And that's just, and that's just me feeding off of what you've shared, Emmanuel, just going back to this idea of dollars. As soon as somebody brings up money, people get real shy. But it's a tool. And it's a necessary tool, and you've shown that it's a necessary tool. But the one thing that I've learned most recently that's also inspiring to me and is that money is everywhere. If you believe money is everywhere, then money is everywhere. If you believe that it's scarce, then it's scarce. And I recognize that it's the position that I find myself in. It's easier for me to say. But in my experience, in both my personal experience and my experience as an advocate, if we open our minds and we network, like Emmanuel says, there are paths forward. The path you're on at the moment might be blocked, but there are paths forward, and there are so many directions that we can branch out as self-advocates. And Emmanuel has done that better than almost anyone I have ever met in my life. I mean, if y'all want to look at the long version of his bio online and read how many organizations this dude is a part of, I can't even pronounce some of the stuff that he's participated in so successfully. I've already talked too much, but for these last couple minutes with you, Emmanuel, does anyone want to unmute and offer a question for Emmanuel? or share their own self-advocacy story, something that you've participated in. We got questions where your email is being requested. Emmanuel, is it okay if we share your email?
It is. It is.
The members of our team.
You can share my email, and I will also say publicly LinkedIn. LinkedIn is always a good place to network. And if you don't have a LinkedIn, I don't care what kind of work you do. You may look in the mirror and say, "Well, I'm just an advocate." Well, first and foremost, you're never just anything. Just should not be in our vocabulary.
Mm.
Just is almost as bad as I can't. But if you don't have a LinkedIn, go get one. Utilize those social media platforms. That is another way of advocating through the power of social media. You know, if I could add this really quickly, the TikTok is on the verge of being banned. I have never seen a group of people, so many people call their legislator quickly to stop the ban of TikTok. But we ask people to advocate for home and community-based services, integrated employment. People will not pick up the phone. They will not email their legislator. But the minute they heard TikTok was going away, people came out of the woodworks. We talked about voting briefly. Our voting rights are under attack, crucially, with the elimination of mail-in voting and the other alternatives. We not only have a responsibility, we have an obligation to
Amen.
speak of it in whatever form that may be. But to answer your question, you can share my email. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I am on all the major social media platforms as well. So please feel free to connect with me there. You can also share the website to my nonprofit, which I can also be emailed through that as well.
Thank you for offering to share that. We've got about, I want to keep you here forever, Emmanuel, but we've got about 2 minutes. Does anyone in the audience want to share their own self-advocacy story? Whether you started a self-advocacy organization or you're a part of one, please raise your hand using the hand icon for Zoom, and I will start looking around. Again, the 2 questions are: tell us about when you participated in an organized advocacy event that was important to you. Number 2, or you can say, tell us about when you organized an advocacy event. And if anyone would like to share their experience. Pamela, you've got your hand up.
Hi, yes, thank you. This is great. I love this meeting very much. And I'm all about advocacy, self-advocacy for the disabled community. And my dog is too. I don't know if you can see him. I do a lot of phone banking virtually, and I really would love to have phone banking of persons with disabilities calling out, because one of the things I dropped in a link of a Substack article that I was a guest writer for that just came out on Monday, about making virtual phone banking accessible, because you do it from your home. It's just like this meeting. We do a training, we support you. And I really would love to have groups of persons with disabilities making these calls, because we understand what we go through. We talk about the issues with barriers to voting. The next article that I'm going to write is when campaigns make their list of the people they call, they look for certain criteria, and it may start out with a specific criteria, but it always ends with persons with disabilities and people who are otherwise homebound not being able to get out to vote. And we don't have a way of reaching out and helping them out other than calling them, bugging them. So we got to do better. We got to do better. Anyhow, thank you so much for having this.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing and thank you for your participation. It really encourages us as a group to continue getting together, and it's very encouraging for the council, Pamela. So thank you. That's huge. Your thoughts and ideas and your organizational skills are huge. The phone bank is awesome. And speaking of resources and opportunities, David, when you're ready, can you jump to the next slide, please?
Chris, you also have two other hands up.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I missed those hands. What we got? I'm seeing the two hands, but I'm not seeing.
You have Grant and Laura.
Grant, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm Grant, and I do participate in the self-advocacy with Hope, and I am proud to be one of those self-advocates.
Very cool. Very cool. As you said, the organization is Self-Advocacy with Hope, Grant?
Yes, it is.
Hope NC.
Yes, Hope
Oh,
NC. That's
Hope, North Carolina. Yes, very
yes.
familiar with that.
I'm also on the board of Hope as a self-advocate.
Yes, you are. I've been to a few of those meetings. Good to see you here. Good to see you here, Grant. And Laura, you had your hand up as well.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Okay, well, I started the Self-Advocate group over 25 years ago. And Yvonne who's on here, she's also part of our group. We have done various different things in the past 25 years to advocate. We are actually at our next meeting next week. We are talking about having somebody we are having somebody come from the Rev Up vote. So hopefully get more people registered to vote. A few years ago, we did get people registered to vote, and we got like a group picture, some of them who voted for the first time.
That's awesome.
So hopefully we'll be able to, because I was talking to some people the other week at the Day Support Center out where I work at, and telling them, about the election. And I'm like, oh, how many of y'all voted in the primaries the other week? And like, they all stared at me like I just jumped up a turnip trip or something. I'm like, they didn't know, they had no clue. So I'm like, okay, time to get somebody come out here again and talk to these people about getting out to vote, because these people didn't go. And so I'm hoping to get more of them to vote, especially since it's a presidential election coming up in November, and a lot of things need to be worked out with SSI rules, and a lot of revisions need to be changed for that, and the marriage penalty thing. I got a petition going, and so we really need to work on a lot of these issues.
Laura's a powerhouse. She's always got so much going on, and your organization has done so much over the years. And we're always so grateful for your share. Thank you all for sharing your stories. And thank you, Emmanuel, for speaking. I wish
thank you, Emmanuel. He was great.
Yeah, I wish we could tractor beam you to North Carolina permanently. Unfortunately, that's against the rules. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. I'll take a moment to go over some resources. Some organized advocacy resources. If you want to learn about organized advocacy, the Ability Leadership Program in North Carolina is great. The website Self-Advocacy Resource and Technical Assistance Center, or SARTAC, is a great resource. Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, or SABE, is great. If you are a young person or young at heart, under the age of 30, check out Youth Lead North Carolina, or even if you're over the age of 30 and you just want to check it out. And of course, check out Emmanuel's organization, We Stand for Something. And as for important dates in Charlotte, I do want to mention we have the Spanish showing of our film Unmet, and it is on the 23rd of this month, I believe. And
It's Saturday.
It's Saturday. Saturday, this, and what's the name? Where's the location? What's it located at? It was in my chat. and I
Friendship
disappeared.
Missionary Baptist Church located at 3400 Beatties Ford Road, Charlotte, North Carolina. That's Friendship Missionary Baptist Church located at 3400 Beatties Ford Road. And the registration information is in the chat. It'll be this Saturday at 2 o'clock.
Yes, and I will also send that out as a resource as soon as this meeting is completed. So with that said, those are a couple of resources for us. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to start talking about voting. We're going to take our voting detour. Next slide, please. 2024 represents a huge opportunity for self-advocates, not only nationally, but locally for our state and community. I saw Emmanuel shaking his head as soon as I started talking about this. You're absolutely right. Did you know that if persons with disabilities voted at the same rate as people without disabilities, there would be 1.75 million more votes? Your votes will help determine party leadership for years of your life. But because voters with disabilities continue to struggle with various aspects of voting, we will talk about voting every month up through November. And this month, we're going to dive deeper into voter ID requirements in North Carolina, as well as your rights as a voter. So it is my pleasure to hand the mic over to our next guest. She is the Voting Programs Manager for Disability Rights North Carolina, and she has a lot to share with us around the topic of voting in the IDD community. As an introduction, here's a little bit more about our guest. Kenya Meyers has dramatically increased funding for voting work and makes sure voters with disabilities can cast a ballot safely, privately, and without impediment. Kenya recently transitioned into her new role as Voting Programs Manager, which is a position that more accurately reflects the roles she's taken on during this time with Disability Rights North Carolina. In addition to her voting work, Meyers has vast experience in identifying abusive lending and housing practices. Over the past 17 years, Meyers assisted and trained numerous local, state, and national organizations on various civil rights and economics party topics. Meyers serves as an adjunct instructor at the Patricia Robert Harris National Fair Housing Training Academy. Goodness, that's a mouthful. And as faculty at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition Training Academy. Welcome, Kenya. Thank you so much for being with us. You work so hard, and yet you made time for us. I know how hard and how hard you work and how busy you are. So thank you for coming and talking to us today.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. It's perfect.
Great.
I understand there's a flyer and a hotline you want to talk to us about.
Absolutely. Do you have a copy of the flyer in the slides, or is it something I need to post?
We don't have a copy of the flyer in the slot. We have a link that we can share out. Can you go to the next slide, David? There's a link to the flyer, and we're going to share it out as a resource. Would you like me to show you?
I'm sorry.
Are you able to talk about the flyer, or do you need me to pull it up?
Oh, no, absolutely. I can talk about it. And so, but if you can put it on the screen, that would be great. But I can absolutely talk about it. So for the, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. Definitely appreciate it. I am the Voting Rights Program Manager at Disability Rights North Carolina. And that is what I do all day, every day, is to make sure that people with disabilities can vote safely, privately, and without impediments. And those are really big words. And what they just means is that whatever you need to vote as a person with a disability, my job is to make sure you have it. If there's any impediment or anything keeping you from voting, my job is to get it changed. And that's what I do all across the state every day. And so one of the things that we published and we distributed during the most recent election was a get out to vote flyer or ready to vote flyer. And basically that flyer serves as a checklist for us and for voters to get ready to vote, to make sure you know the when, where, and the how to vote, that you're prepared to go to the polls. The when being you're clear about deadlines in terms of registration, deadlines in terms of when you can request an absentee ballot, deadline dates in terms of the early voting dates, and of course the election day dates, the where to vote. We provide information regarding the early voting sites and the dates and times of the early voting sites across the state, because that information is not consistent. It's different from county to county. So we make sure that regardless of where you live in the state, you know when early voting is occurring and where early voting is occurring in your state. And then also the how you're going to vote, because there are many options. If you want to vote in person, the traditional way, by going inside. If you want to vote in person, but you want to utilize curbside voting, meaning you can drive up and vote. If you want to vote in person and you need to utilize the accessible machine inside, that's also an option. If you want to vote by mail, absentee voting, we make sure that you understand how to complete that ballot completely, include your ID or fill out the waiver form where that you would not have to provide an ID, and make sure that you understand you have to have 2 witnesses, and just all the information is filled out correctly. If you're inside of a facility and you need for a MAT team, which is a team that the county Board of Election has to provide, we make sure that if you need them and you request them, that they come out timely and they assist you as needed. And then lastly, if you're a blind voter or visually impaired, you actually have the option of voting online. And so there are multiple ways that people with disabilities can vote. And we just make sure that whichever way you choose, that you can do it safely and timely, of course, privately, and without any impediments. I'll just pause there. If there's anyone who would like to ask any questions about the when, where, and how of voting.
Does anyone have any questions for Kenya? That was a lot of information because Kenya works so hard to put all this together, and voting is so important for us as a community. I'm looking through the chat. And by the way, if you don't want to come off camera and ask your question, if you don't want to unmute or you don't want to raise your hand, you're welcome to put your question in the chat. Pamela looks like she's got a question. Pamela, go right ahead.
Hi, Kenya. I have questions about, they recently changed the rules about who can go into like nursing facilities and assisted living and stuff like that, that you don't have to use the MAT team. Am I correct with that? Can an organization do something like that? I'm sorry, my dogs. Is that something that can be done now?
So the answer is yes and no. So a person with a disability, they have the right to ask anyone to help them, but facilities unfortunately still have the ability to restrict who comes in and out of a facility. And so one of the recent law changes that Disability Rights was able to help change through litigation is that the people who work in a facility, yes, that's the flyer. Thank you so much. The people who work in a facility, they can now assist the residents without any fear of prosecution. And so, and no, you're right, it does not have to be a MAT team, and it can be anyone, but facilities still can restrict who can come in and out of their facility.
That's good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kenya, can you take a little bit more, just a moment more, if you can, to talk a little bit more about the voter ID requirements for the members of the community, and just what that means for the community, like the requirements themselves, and why people feel it's necessary, and how accessible those IDs are for us if we don't have one.
Okay, so I won't talk about why people feel it's necessary, because at the moment it's the law of the land in North Carolina. So
Right.
you have to present an ID in order to vote in North Carolina. And that began with the last election, the municipal elections in the fall of 2023, and then the primaries that were just held in March. Voter ID had to be presented. There are exceptions if you don't have an ID, but I'll talk about that next. There are several IDs that are considered acceptable, and I'm putting up air quotes. But I like to talk about the top three, if I could, because those are the ones that are least questioned. And we don't want our folks with disabilities to be asked any more additional questions than anyone else. So a North Carolina driver's license, of course, is on the list of an acceptable ID. A North Carolina ID card. And then there's a new ID that was introduced specifically for voting, and it's issued by the County Board of Elections. It's called a voter ID. And regardless of what county you live in North Carolina, all 100 county boards of elections, they have to issue, if upon request, a voter ID. It is free, and it is very easy to obtain. We did some testing when it first rolled out. And basically, there's just one piece of paper that has to be filled out that includes your name, your address, and the last four numbers of your social security number. Your picture is taken right there, and it's presented to you usually within about 10, 15 minutes tops. And it is acceptable in terms of voting. And so what we found is that those three IDs, they were the most used during the primary election. As I go through data right now, and just review some things, I'm doing debriefing meetings right now. And those three that I just mentioned were the IDs that were used the most, and that were questioned the least, which is what we want. But there are others that are acceptable. A US passport is acceptable. If you attend a college or a university where the ID has been approved by the State Board of Elections. So it's not all North Carolina colleges and universities. The college or university had to take the step to seek approval from the State Board of Elections. And so there is a list. You can go to the State Board of Elections website, and it has listed out currently all of the colleges and universities whose IDs have been deemed acceptable. And then in addition to that, there are some tribal IDs for some of our native, our indigenous and native voters. Some of their IDs are acceptable. That list is also on the website. Some military IDs, not all. And each ID has a different caveat. Most of them require that they have to be current and unexpired, but if they are, it can be within a year. So if you have a North Carolina ID or driver's license, if it's expired within the last 12 months of the day that you're trying to vote, it's still usable. It's still considered, air quotes, acceptable. So there are a lot of little caveats, which is why we pioneered and started assisting folks with disabilities to obtain IDs during this election. We were actually able to provide rides to folks to go down to the DMV and get you an appointment, especially in those counties where appointments are hard to come by. We were getting folks appointments within about a week and a half, and then providing you with a ride to go to the DMV to get that ID, or if you needed a ride to the County Board of Elections, we were able to get you a ride to go to the County Board of Elections to ensure that you had an ID prior to going to vote. Because there is a way to vote without an ID. But what we saw from the municipal elections in the fall of 2023 is that 83% of the ballots were accepted when ID was presented. And when it wasn't, it was only 67% of the ballots. And so it's a huge difference in if your ballot is accepted or not, just based on if you present ID or not. And so there is a form that you can request if you don't have an ID, and for multiple reasons, and disability is listed on the form, and that is an acceptable reason as to not having an ID. And if you fill out that exception form and list disability, one of the things that we did just during the most recent canvass, and canvass is just the time after you vote, 10 days until the vote is certified by county. We made sure that everyone who utilized the exception form and listed disability as their exception, we went and monitored those meetings to ensure that those disability ballots cast by people with disabilities, that they were actually counted, because that
That's
is
awesome.
a legitimate reason to not present an ID. And so we wanted to, again, protect our folks, our constituents. Like I said, that's a part of my job, to make sure that you're able to cast the ballot, of course, that the ballot is counted. So again, I know that's a lot, so I'll pause again. And if there are any questions, I'm certainly willing to answer them.
Well, Kenya, first of all, thank you so much. I said this twice, I'll say it a third time. You worked so hard and you took the time to be with us. And you're not only going to be with us now, but we're going to spotlight you in April. You are our person for April's Self-Advocate discussion series. We're going to give you 45 minutes of awesomeness, and we can't wait to give it to you to go into this more in depth. The next slide on our resource slide is our voting resources. I won't go through all of them because it's a lot, but I will add all of those resources to our resource list that I send to each and every participant today. And we are over time very briefly for 3 minutes. So I just want to take the time to thank our speakers. Thank you, Emmanuel, Jenkins. Thank you so much, Kenya, Meyers. Thank you to our ASL interpreters. Thank you to our Spanish interpreters and Spanish recorder. Thank you to our captioner. Thank you to our resourceful staff behind the scenes. And thank you all self-advocates who have made this such an empowering discussion. We would not be here without you, and we're going to continue on. We will continue on next week. You can see the voting resources slide on your left, but again, I'll be sending that out in an email. And I don't want to go over too much. So I appreciate all your time. And Kenya, we look forward to having you as our speaker next week. Thank you all so much for being here, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. Stay.